You ever have a moment in your life that just freezes? Like time stops, your heart is pounding, and you just know, that whatever happens next, there's no going back? I had one of those moments. And I wish I could tell you I made the right choice. I wish I could say I walked away before the line blurred, before the air got thick with something unspoken. But the truth? The truth is, I don't even know if I wanted to. It started so simple, so innocent. My husband's best friend, someone I'd known for years, came over to help me trim the garden while my husband was out of town. Just a favor, just a little yard work. That's all it was supposed to be. But looking back now, I see the signs. The way he looked at me that day. The way I looked at him. The way something in the air shifted, like the universe had been waiting for this moment. I keep asking myself, was it really just an accident? Or was there something already there, something waiting beneath the surface, just looking for an excuse to come out? I don't know when my marriage became a routine. When the kisses got shorter, the conversations got quieter, the silence at night started feeling heavier. My husband, he's a good man. He's loyal. He's hardworking. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling seen. Stopped feeling like a woman. And then there was him. Tall, strong, easygoing. Always had a way of making people laugh. Always had this energy about him, like he could turn a boring moment into something exciting. I never noticed it before, or maybe I never let myself. That day, standing there in the hot sun, sweat trickling down my back, dirt under my fingernails, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Noticed. It was a single moment. A second too long of eye contact. A touch that lingered when it shouldn't have. A shift in the air so subtle, but so loud. I should have walked away. I should have said something, done something to stop it before it got too far. But the thing about moments like this? You don't always see them for what they are, until it's too late. Some moments haunt you forever. Some choices, once made, can never be undone. And when my husband came home that night, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Stay until the end, because this story, it might change how you see trust forever. That night, after my husband came home, I sat at the kitchen table, pretending everything was normal. Pretending my heart wasn't racing. Pretending my body didn't still feel the heat of the afternoon, the weight of a gaze that lasted just a second too long. I stirred my tea, staring at the steam swirling into the air, lost in thought. My husband, he barely looked up from his phone, too tired from his trip, too distracted by work emails. I watched him, waiting for something. Maybe a touch, maybe a glance that lingered, maybe a question. How was your day? Did you miss me? But all I got was a tired sigh. Long day, he muttered, scrolling through his messages. The client meeting ran over and traffic was a nightmare. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, sounds exhausting. I wanted him to ask about me. I wanted him to look up, to see me. To notice that something about me had changed, that something in me had shifted. But he didn't. He just grabbed a fork, ate in silence, and when he was done, he kissed me on the forehead, quick, distracted, like a habit he didn't think twice about, and went upstairs to shower. That was my marriage. We were comfortable. We had routines. We were stable. But I was invisible. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always the kind of woman who let her mind wander to dangerous places. I was a wife, a mother, a person who once felt needed. But somewhere along the way, the days started blending together. My husband, let's call him David, had always been ambitious, always the first one at work, the last one to leave. He built his life around providing. And for the longest time, I convinced myself that was enough. That his long hours, his distracted mind, his absence, it wasn't a sign of anything missing. It was just life. But life has a way of quietly stealing things from you. First, it steals the long conversations at night, when you used to talk about dreams and fears and secrets. Then, it takes away the laughter, the spontaneous kisses, the way he used to reach for your hand without thinking. And before you even realize it, you're sitting across from someone who feels more like a roommate than a husband. I still remember the first time I really felt it. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair, when I caught a glimpse of myself. And for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The tired eyes, the faded smile, the way my clothes fit, not tight, not loose, just there. I used to take time with myself. I used to feel beautiful. I used to feel like a woman. And yet, there I was. Just his wife. Just somebody's mother. Just someone who was fading. And then, there was Mark. Mark had been in our lives for years. He and my husband met in college, played football together, stood at each other's weddings. He was the kind of man who lit up a room the second he walked in, effortlessly confident, effortlessly charming. And for the longest time, he was just that. David's best friend. A familiar face at BBQs, a voice on the phone when they talked about business and investments. But recently, something felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the way I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way his eyes lingered when we spoke. The way he'd tease me, not in a crude way, not in an obvious way, just enough to make my pulse quicken. The way he'd call me trouble with a smirk, even when I wasn't doing anything. It was all so subtle. Little moments. Harmless, until they weren't. That afternoon, when Mark showed up to help with the garden, the sun was relentless. The kind of heat that makes the air feel heavy, like it's pressing down on your skin, making every movement slow and deliberate. I remember wiping the sweat from my brow, looking around at the overgrown hedges, the tangled vines creeping up the fence. The whole yard felt like an extension of my life, unruly, neglected, suffocating. "This place needs some serious work," Mark said, stretching his arms above his head, his shirt lifting just enough to expose the hard lines of his stomach. I swallowed, quickly looking away. "Yeah, it's a mess." He grinned. "Good thing you called in the expert." I laughed, shaking my head. "Pretty sure David called you in, not me." "Yeah, well." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough. "If I'm being honest, I don't mind helping you out." That was the first moment. The first flicker of something that should have made me step back, should have made me end the conversation there. But I didn't. I smiled. I let it happen. And the worst part? I liked it. We worked side by side, trimming, cutting, clearing. But the tension? It was everywhere. The way our hands brushed when we reached for the same tool. The way he stood just a little too close, his body heat mixing with the thick, sticky air. At one point, he pulled off his shirt, tossing it onto the porch. "Damn, it's hot," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. I shouldn't have looked. I should not have looked. But I did. And I knew he noticed. "Careful, trouble," he teased, flashing that knowing grin. "You're staring." I felt my face flush. "Oh, please." I rolled my eyes, forcing a laugh, trying to play it off. "I've seen you shirtless before, Mark." "Yeah." His voice dipped lower, playful, but with something else beneath it. Something darker. But not like this. My stomach tightened. I should have shut it down. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, feeling the air thicken between us. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just harmless anymore. I don't know if it was the heat, the loneliness, or just the way he looked at me like I was something worth noticing again. But something was happening. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. The night before my husband left for his weekend trip, I watched him pack. He folded his shirts neatly, placed his shoes in a separate compartment, checked his itinerary twice, always so methodical, so precise. It struck me then, how easily he could prepare for days away from me. How easily he could move through life without noticing the small things, the things I had stopped saying out loud. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You'll be gone all weekend?" He nodded, barely looking up. "Yeah." I told Mark to swing by and help with the garden. My heart skipped, just for a second. "Mark." I swallowed. You told him?" "Yeah." "You don't mind, do you?" He glanced at me then, his eyes tired but trusting. "I figured you'd appreciate the help." I forced a smile. "Yeah, of course. That's fine." I should have said something. Should have found a reason to say no. But instead, I just stood there, feeling something shift inside me, something quiet but undeniable. A feeling I wasn't ready to name. The next morning, David kissed my forehead, habit, routine, nothing more, and walked out the front door. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street. And just like that, I was alone. Or at least, I was supposed to be. A little before noon, I heard the knock. A single, heavy thud-thud-thud against the wooden door. I hesitated. Just for a moment. Then I opened it. And there he was. Mark stood on my porch, a relaxed grin on his face, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his jeans. "Hope you don't mind me showing up early," he said, his eyes scanning me quickly before locking onto mine. "Figured we could get started before the heat gets unbearable." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, that makes sense." I stepped aside, letting him in. As he brushed past me, his arm grazed mine, just a small touch, barely there. But my skin burned where we connected. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just gardening. Just two old friends helping each other out. But deep down, I knew. Something felt different. We started in the backyard, the sun already beating down mercilessly. Mark pulled off his hoodie, tossing it onto the porch railing, leaving just a thin gray t-shirt that clung to his frame. He stretched, rolling his shoulders, and I caught myself watching, just for a second too long. "You good?" he asked, catching my stare. I quickly turned away, pretending to adjust my gloves. "Yeah, just trying to figure out where to start." He smirked. "Well, I say we start with the hedges. Unless you want to just sit around and watch me do all the work." I rolled my eyes, laughing. "Oh please, I could probably do this better than you." His eyebrows lifted. "That's so." Before I could react, he stepped behind me, reaching for the garden shears in my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, and for the briefest second, we were too close. The heat between us wasn't just from the sun anymore. "Here," he murmured, guiding my hands to position the shears correctly. His voice was low, almost teasing, but there was something else in it. Something heavier. My breath caught. He was close enough to feel. Close enough that if I turned my head just a little, our faces would be inches apart. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. I think I got it, but he didn't move. Not right away. His hands lingered over mine for just a second longer than necessary. A hesitation. A choice waiting to be made. Then, slowly, too slowly, he stepped back. "Good," he said, his voice unreadable. "Wouldn't want you hurting yourself." I exhaled shakily, forcing a chuckle. "Yeah, wouldn't want that." But as I bent down to trim the next section, I felt it, his gaze. Watching, not in a casual way. Not in a way that could be brushed off as nothing. It was intentional. Deliberate. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Time blurred after that. Maybe it was the summer heat. Maybe it was the way sweat trickled down the back of my neck, sticking my shirt to my skin. Maybe it was the way Mark's presence felt different than it ever had before. Whatever it was, I felt it. The unspoken thing sitting heavy between us. At one point, he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, then grinned at me. "Damn, it's hot." "Yeah," I murmured, swallowing hard. "It is." Then, without a second thought, he reached for the hem of his shirt and pulled it over his head. My breath hitched. His body was sculpted, lean muscle under tanned skin. I had seen him shirtless before, beach days, pool parties, but this time, it felt different. This time, I knew I wasn't supposed to look. And yet, I did. I didn't mean to. I really, really didn't mean to. But my gaze lingered. And when I finally dragged my eyes away, I realized he had been watching me the whole time. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. "Careful, trouble," he teased, his voice lower now. "You're staring." I forced out a laugh, shaking my head. "Oh, shut up." But my hands trembled. And the worst part? I didn't know if it was from embarrassment or excitement. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of stolen glances, lingering touches, words that meant something more but were left unsaid. When I stood on my tiptoes to reach a stubborn branch, he placed a hand on my waist, steadying me, but holding on just a little too long. When I bent down to grab another tool, I could feel him behind me, close, too close. And when I looked up, wiping sweat from my forehead, he was watching me, that same unreadable look in his eyes. I should have stopped it then. I should have laughed it off, set boundaries, done something to make it clear that this was just nothing. But I didn't. Instead, I met his gaze. Instead, I let the silence stretch, heavy and full of possibility. And in that moment, under the blazing sun, standing in the overgrown backyard of a house that had started to feel like a cage, I realized something. This wasn't just a harmless afternoon. This wasn't nothing. It was the start of something. And I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to stop it. I should have pulled away. I should have laughed it off, brushed the dirt off my hands, and gone inside before anything could happen, before anything could even start. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of his gaze on me, feeling the air between us shift, feeling something inside me I hadn't felt in a long, long time. It had been so long since someone looked at me like that. Like I was something to be noticed, something to be wanted. And it terrified me. Because the truth? I wanted it. I wanted to hold on to that feeling for just a little longer. But then, guilt. It hit me hard and fast, like ice water being thrown over my skin. This was my husband's best friend. This was wrong. I had never cheated in my life, never even thought about it before. I wasn't that kind of woman, wasn't the kind of person who let her mind drift to dangerous places. And yet, my heart was still pounding. My hands still trembled, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Mark smirked, running a hand through his damp hair. You good? I forced out a breath, nodding too quickly. Yeah, of course. Just hot. He eyed me for a second longer before turning back to the hedge, his muscles tensing as he clipped another branch. Gotta admit, I don't mind the view. My stomach tightened. He wasn't talking about the garden. I opened my mouth to say something, anything to change the subject, to push us back into safe, neutral territory. But then, I laughed. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. But it slipped out light, breathy, too easy. And that's when I realized. I was enjoying this. I was enjoying the way he looked at me, the way his voice dipped just slightly lower when he spoke to me, the way his compliments felt like something more. And that was dangerous. So dangerous. I told myself it was harmless. That we were just two people working in the garden, sharing a few laughs, nothing more. I told myself I was overthinking it. That he was just friendly, that Mark had always been playful, always had a way of making people feel comfortable. But then why did my skin tingle where he had touched me? Why did my pulse quicken every time he stepped too close? Why did I suddenly feel so alive when I had been numb for so long? I reached for my water bottle, taking a long sip, trying to cool myself down, trying to slow my racing thoughts. I had a husband. A good husband. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He wasn't the kind of man who deserved this. So why? Why did I suddenly feel like something inside me had been starving for this kind of attention? I tried to keep my distance after that. Tried to focus on the garden, on trimming, on the sweat trickling down my back. But then came the small moments. The ones that shouldn't have meant anything. The ones that I told myself were harmless. Like the way he leaned over me, his chest brushing my shoulder, to grab the pruning shears. Like the way his fingers lingered just a second too long when he handed them back to me. Like the way he would say my name, slowly, deliberately, as if tasting it before letting it go. I hated how much I liked it. Hated how easy it was to let my guard slip, to forget for a second that this wasn't some flirtation with a stranger. This was Mark, David's best friend. And yet, when he caught me staring again, when he smirked in that knowing way, when he leaned in just slightly, his voice dropping, "You sure you're good, trouble?" I felt my breath hitch. And instead of stepping back, I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible anymore. That night, after Mark left, I stood under the cold shower, letting the water run over me, trying to scrub the day off my skin. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling. The way his hands had felt against mine. The way his voice had sounded when he called me trouble. The way he had looked at me, like he was seeing me in a way I hadn't been seen in years. I squeezed my eyes shut, inhaling sharply. It didn't mean anything. It was just a little fun. A harmless moment. A fleeting thing. But deep down, I knew better. I felt better. And that scared me more than anything else. Because I knew that if I wasn't careful, this wasn't going to stop here. This wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of something. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. I told myself I would be different the next day. That I would keep my distance. That I would remember who I was, what I had, what was at stake. But some things, they have a way of pulling you in, no matter how hard you try to resist. And Mark? Mark was pulling me in without even trying. The next morning, he showed up again, just as promised. Same confident stance. Same easy smile. Same presence that made the air feel heavier, charged. I had barely stepped outside when he glanced at me, eyes flickering down my body before meeting my gaze again. "Morning, trouble," he said smoothly, voice still rough from sleep. My stomach flipped. I should have ignored it. Should have brushed past him and started working. Should have pretended like yesterday never happened. But instead, I smiled. Morning. It was just one word. A simple greeting. But the way I said it? It didn't sound innocent at all. We worked side by side again, just like before. But today it felt different. The tension was thicker, more undeniable. And then, it happened. A simple moment. A shift. He wiped the sweat from his brow, sighing. "Damn, it's hot." And before I could react, he grabbed the hem of his shirt and pulled it over his head, tossing it onto the railing without a second thought. The muscles in his back flexed as he stretched, rolling his neck, exhaling as if the heat was suffocating him. I should not have looked. I should not have noticed. But my eyes betrayed me, dragging over the lines of his stomach, the curve of his shoulders, the sheen of sweat that made his skin glow under the sun. And then, his gaze caught mine. I froze. His lips curved into that slow, knowing smirk. "Careful," he murmured, voice teasing, but low, too low. "You're staring again." Heat crawled up my neck. I forced out a breathy laugh. "Oh, shut up." But I turned away too quickly. And we both knew what that meant. We worked in silence for a while after that. The only sounds were the buzz of cicadas, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind blew. But the silence was loud. And then, his voice cut through it. "You know," he said, casually at first. But something about his tone made me pause. I glanced over, wiping the back of my hand across my forehead. "What?" Mark leaned against the fence, studying me. "You're more than just a wife, you know." The words hit me harder than they should have. I swallowed. "What does that mean?" He shrugged, running a hand through his damp hair. "Just saying. Sometimes I think you forget that." His eyes were steady, intentional. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Because I knew what he meant. Because he was right. I looked away, pretending to focus on trimming the hedge. "Mark, you're beautiful." I froze. My hands gripped the shears tighter, my heart pounding so loudly I swore he could hear it. He said it so easily, so certainly, and for a moment I forgot how to respond. Because my husband hadn't told me that in years. And now, here I was, another man saying the words I had been desperate to hear. I forced out a laugh, shaking my head. "You're just saying that because I'm covered in dirt and sweat." Mark smirked. "I think you look good like this." My stomach twisted. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't just playful teasing anymore. This was dangerous. I needed space. Air. I turned too fast, stepping back, and suddenly my foot caught on the edge of a stone. I stumbled, arms flailing, and before I could hit the ground, his hands were on me. Fast. Firm. Holding me tight. One strong arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against him. My hands instinctively gripped his bare shoulders, my fingers digging into his skin. For a split second, just one split second, we were locked there, chest to chest. His breath warm against my temple. I could hear his heartbeat. feel the heat radiating off his skin. Time slowed. Everything slowed. My breathing was ragged, my body still pressed into his. I should have pulled away. Should have said something, anything. But I didn't. Instead, my hands stayed right where they were. And so did his. "Whoa," he murmured, his grip still secure around me. His voice was different now. Rougher. Lower. "You okay?" I nodded. But I didn't move. Neither did he. We were standing too close. Holding on too long. I felt his fingers flex slightly against my waist, like he was debating something. Like he was trying to hold himself back. And I should have stepped away first. I should have broken the moment before it could become something more. But instead, I looked up. And his face was right there. Inches from mine. His lips were slightly parted, his eyes dark, searching, like he was trying to read my thoughts. The moment stretched. It stretched too long. My heart pounded. Everything in me screamed to move, to stop this before it crossed the line. So I laughed. A breathless, nervous laugh. Because what else was I supposed to do? Because I had no idea what would have happened if I hadn't. And Mark? He didn't laugh. He just looked at me. Longer than he should have. Deeper than he should have. And then, finally, he let go. The warmth of his hands disappeared. The moment shattered. And just like that, we both pretended nothing had happened. Even though we both knew something had. Something had changed between us. After that moment, the stumble, the hands that lingered too long, the look that said too much, things felt different. We tried to go back to normal. We tried to keep working, keep trimming, keep talking about anything but what had just happened. But it was there, sitting between us like a storm cloud, growing darker by the second. I could feel it in the way he moved. The way he didn't joke as much anymore. The way he kept stealing glances when he thought I wasn't looking. And the worst part? I felt it in myself. The way my skin still tingled where he had touched me. The way my heart raced every time I caught him looking. The way my stomach tightened with something dangerous whenever he stepped too close. And as the afternoon stretched on, the sky above us began to shift. The heat had been unbearable all day, thick and suffocating, pressing against my skin like a warning. But now, the air had changed. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, making the leaves whisper secrets to one another. The sky, once a sharp, cloudless blue, had begun to darken. It was as if the universe itself could feel the tension growing between us. I wiped my forehead, glancing up. "Looks like a storm's coming." Mark didn't look at the sky. He looked at me. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see that." My breath caught. Because we weren't talking about the weather anymore. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was something inevitable, something that had been building since the second he showed up at my door. All I know is 1 second, we were standing apart. And the next, he was close. Too close. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, hear the subtle hitch in his breath. I should have stepped back. I should have stopped it. But I didn't. I didn't move at all. Instead, I just stood there, my heart pounding, my body frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, before it was too late. And then, he leaned in. Not much. Just enough. Just enough for me to know, without a doubt, what was about to happen. His lips weren't on mine, but they were close. So close I could feel the warmth of them, could almost taste the moment before it happened. And the worst part? I didn't pull away. Not immediately. For just 1 second, I let myself wonder. I let myself imagine what it would feel like, what it would mean, what it would change. And then, a sudden, sharp crack of thunder. The sky roared above us, loud and sudden, snapping through the thick air like a whip. I gasped, flinching back. The moment shattered. Mark exhaled sharply, stepping away too, running a hand through his hair. "Damn," he muttered, almost to himself. I swallowed, my hands shaking. What the hell was I doing? I had to get out of there. I have to go inside, I blurted, my voice uneven, breaking. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned on my heel and rushed inside, my heart slamming against my ribs, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't look back. Didn't dare. Because I knew if I had, I wouldn't have been strong enough to walk away. I shut the door behind me, pressing my back against the cool wood, squeezing my eyes shut. I hadn't done anything. Hadn't kissed him. Hadn't touched him. Hadn't let it go too far. So why did it feel like I had? Why did it feel like something had already been crossed? Why did my lips still burn from something that never even happened? I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I was shaking. Not from fear. Not from guilt. From something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. I took a deep breath. Another. I told myself it was over. That nothing had happened. That nothing would happen. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I stood there, back pressed against the door, my breath still uneven. Inside, the house was cool. Still. Safe. But outside, Mark was still there. I could feel it. Through the wooden door, through the thick summer air, through the lingering heat of something that almost happened. I didn't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for my breathing to slow. Long enough for my thoughts to catch up to me. I hadn't kissed him. Hadn't let him touch me. Hadn't, but I wanted to. And that was worse, wasn't it? Because wanting something, allowing yourself to want something, was the first step toward losing control. I forced myself to move, peeling my back away from the door, pressing my palms against the cool surface of the kitchen counter. I needed to clear my head. I needed to forget. I didn't hear him leave right away. For a moment, there was just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence stretching between us. I refused to look out the window, refused to see him standing there. But I knew he was. I could feel it. The weight of his presence lingering, just like his hands had lingered on my waist. And then, a footstep. Slow. Measured. He wasn't rushing to leave. He was waiting. Waiting for me to say something. I bit my lip, tightening my grip on the edge of the counter. What did he expect me to do? Open the door and undo the moment I had just escaped from? I couldn't. I wouldn't. Because if I did, if I acknowledged what had happened, what almost happened, I didn't know if I'd be strong enough to stop it from happening again. And then, finally, his voice. Muffled through the door, but still clear enough. If you ever feel like talking, his voice was steady, unreadable, but there was something else underneath it. Something I wasn't ready to name. You know where to find me. And then, just like that, he was gone. I exhaled, long and slow, my fingers trembling as they ran over the smooth surface of the counter. He was gone. It was over. So why did I feel like something inside me had just closed too soon? Why did I feel like I had just let something slip through my fingers, something I shouldn't have even been reaching for? I should have been relieved. I should have been grateful that nothing had happened. That I had walked away. That I had stopped it. So why did my chest feel tight? Why did I still feel the ghost of his breath on my skin? Why did my lips still feel like they had been moments away from tasting something forbidden? I shook my head, gripping the counter harder. No, this wasn't disappointment. This wasn't longing. This was just the remnants of a close call. That was all. That was all. My phone buzzed on the counter. I jumped. For a second, just a brief second, my mind betrayed me. My breath hitched, my heart slammed against my ribs, and before I could stop myself, I hoped. I hoped it was him. I snatched the phone off the counter, my fingers tightening around it. But it wasn't Mark. It was David. David. The man I was supposed to love. The man I had built a life with. The man who had trusted me, trusted both of us, without a second thought. David, how's the garden coming along? My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. It was an innocent question. Simple. Casual. But in my hands, it felt like a loaded gun. Because how was I supposed to answer? Fine? Nothing about today had been fine. Nothing about today had been normal. I had almost done something I could never take back. And yet, my thumbs moved. I typed the word before I could think too hard about it. Fine. And then, I hesitated. The cursor blinked at me. Mocking me. daring me to correct myself, to tell the truth. But what was the truth? That I had almost kissed his best friend? That I had let myself want something I had no right to want? That for just 1 second. I had forgotten who I was supposed to be. I stared at the word, at the lie, and then I hit send. The moment the message delivered, I set my phone down carefully. Slow, deliberate. Like if I moved too fast, I might shatter something fragile. Like if I let myself think too long, I might change my mind. David would believe me. He wouldn't question it. He would read that one word and move on with his day, never knowing how close I had come to crossing a line I could never uncross. Never knowing that his best friend had just walked away from our house with the same secret burning in his chest. Never knowing that right now, asterisk, in this very moment, asterisk, I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about Mark. And I didn't know how to stop. I sat there for what felt like hours, the room around me dimming with the setting sun. My phone was still on the counter, the silence in the house pressing in from all sides. It should have been peaceful, calm, but I wasn't at peace. Not anymore. I kept asking myself the same question, over and over. Did I cheat? The answer was clear, wasn't it? No. I hadn't kissed him. I hadn't touched him in a way that crossed any line. There were no secret texts, no promises whispered in the dark. I hadn't done anything. But then, why did it feel like I had? I could still feel the weight of his hands on me. The way his lips hovered just inches away, the heat of his breath as he leaned in. I could still hear his voice, low and dangerous, the words that weren't just casual anymore. You're beautiful. I could feel the tremor in my body when he said it. The way it lingered in the air. So, no, I hadn't cheated. But had I wanted to? Had I let myself want something that wasn't mine to want? Had I allowed myself to feel anything that had nothing to do with David? The guilt, it washed over me like a tide, pulling me under. But it wasn't just guilt. It was the realization. The truth I couldn't admit even to myself. I liked it. I liked the way it felt when he looked at me like I was more than just a wife. More than just a mother. I liked the way my body responded to his touch, even when it was nothing, just a brush of his hand, just a breath too close. I liked the way he made me feel alive again. And that, more than anything, that terrified me. I couldn't stop the thought. It kept repeating, spiraling in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape from. If I had stayed outside just a little longer, what would have happened? Would I have stopped him? Would I have pulled away? Would I have pushed him off, laughed it off like I was supposed to? Or would I have let it happen? Would I have let him cross that line with me, let myself fall into something I couldn't take back? The possibility lingered in my mind, haunting me. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend like it didn't matter. Because the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't know if I would have stopped him. And that scared me more than anything. I sat back, letting my eyes wander over the familiar space of our home. The pictures on the walls, the small trinkets that used to bring me comfort. Now, they just felt like reminders. Reminders of what? Of the woman I used to be? Of the person I used to feel like I was? Or of the person I was becoming without even realizing it? I thought about David. The man who had trusted me, who had stood by me through everything. How could I look him in the eye now? How could I go back to pretending everything was fine when I wasn't sure it was? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. But they wouldn't leave. I had told myself it was nothing. That it was just an afternoon of gardening, just a few compliments thrown in for good measure. I told myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. But deep down, I knew. I knew that it was never really about the garden. It was about what I had felt in those moments, what I had allowed myself to feel. And that was a lie I couldn't keep telling myself. The most terrifying thing about all of this? It wasn't just the guilt. It wasn't just the fear of losing David. It was the recognition that I didn't know who I was anymore. The woman who stood in that backyard with Mark. She was someone different. Someone who allowed herself to be seen. Someone who didn't just settle for the quiet, predictable life she had built. And that scared me. Because what if I wanted more? What if the life I had built with David wasn't enough anymore? What if I craved something different, something dangerous, something that made me feel alive again? The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. But I couldn't deny it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that terrified me the most. I should have stopped it. I should have stopped myself. But I didn't. And now, I don't know how to undo it. Because part of me doesn't want to. And that's what scares me the most. I've shared my story. The twists, the turns, the things I wish I could take back, and the things I don't know how to undo. But now, I want to hear from you. Because this is bigger than just one moment. Bigger than just one choice. What do you think? Is emotional betrayal just as bad as physical betrayal? If I hadn't pulled away when I did, if I'd just let things go a little further, would it have been different? Would it have been easier to explain to myself or to David? Or is it the feeling, the wanting of something forbidden, that makes it worse? Have you ever been in a situation like this, where the lines blur, where it's not clear who's at fault, and where everything feels wrong even though you didn't technically do anything? I know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. I can't be. So, drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Maybe your story is different. Maybe you've been in my shoes, or maybe you've seen someone else walk down the same path. Whatever it is, I want to hear from you. And if you love gripping stories that make you question everything, that make you think twice about your own choices, make sure to like and subscribe. Trust me, there's so much more coming. Because sometimes the most complicated stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. And we're just getting started. As I sit here, thinking about everything that's happened, everything I've shared with you, there's one thing I know for sure. Some lines are invisible until you've already crossed them. We all like to think we can control our choices, that we're strong enough to know where to stop, to draw a line in the sand and say, no further. But the truth? The truth is that sometimes we don't see the line until it's too late. And by the time we realize it's there, we've already taken that step we never thought we would. That's the hardest part, the part we don't talk about. Because it's not always the obvious choices that get us. Not the ones where you can say, yes, this was the moment I crossed the line. Sometimes, it's the moments that are just out of reach. The ones that aren't physical, the ones that leave you with questions and what-ifs. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what happened. It's what could have. And the fear of that? The fear of what you might have allowed to happen if you just stayed a little longer, given in a little more? That's what stays with you. That's the thing that eats away at you when you're alone in the dark, wondering if you're the person you think you are. So, here's my warning to you. Be careful where you let yourself go. Be careful of those invisible lines, the ones you think you can handle, the ones that seem harmless at first. Because once you cross them, there's no turning back. And sometimes, the hardest thing is knowing how far you would have gone, if only the circumstances had been just a little different.